November 12, 1944. 10,000 feet above the Belgian countryside. The air was thin enough to sting. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the canopy, creeping like frost across glass. Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Callahan could see his breath fog with every exhale, small clouds that vanished the moment they touched the frozen metal of his P-47 Thunderbolt. His gloved hand rested on the control stick, fingers stiff from cold and tension. The engine hummed, a low, steady roar that vibrated through his chest. Below, the world was a patchwork of gray and white. Fields stitched together by hedgerows, villages reduced to smoke and rubble, and cutting across the sky like scars contrails, thin white lines that marked where planes had been, where planes were going, and where planes had died. The radio crackled. Static first, then a voice sharp and clipped. Bandits. 2 o'clock high. Multiple contacts. Callahan's eyes snapped to the right, there, high and fast. Dark shapes against the pale winter sky. 6, maybe 7 aircraft. And even at this distance he could see them. The black crosses on their wings. Luftwaffe. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Somewhere in that formation was the one they'd been warned about. The one they called the Falcon. 47 confirmed kills. A man who hunted Allied pilots the way hawks hunted sparrows. Vertical dives. Precision gunnery. And a habit of vanishing into cloud cover before anyone could return fire. The squadron leader's voice came through again. Calm. Steady. Too steady. Maintain formation. Do not break. Do not engage alone. Acknowledge. One by one, the pilots acknowledged. Callahan's thumb hovered over the radio button. He pressed it, Roger, holding formation. But his eyes never left the enemy planes above. They were diving now, angling toward the American formation like wolves circling a herd. Protocol said stay together. Protocol said strength in numbers. Protocol said a lot of things. But protocol didn't account for the fact that somewhere up there, death had a name and 47 notches on its fuselage. And Callahan had a choice to make. One that would either save a life or end his own. One that couldn't wait for orders or approval or permission. Just instinct. Just the stick in his hand and the sky in front of him. And in that frozen moment at 10,000 feet, with ice on the canopy and fear in his throat, Jimmy Callahan realized something his father had told him years ago was about to be tested. Trust your gut over the manual. Easy to say on the ground. Harder when the sky is full of black crosses and the radio is screaming at you to hold formation. But first you have to understand who Jimmy Callahan was, and how a farm boy from Indiana ended up here. If you had asked James Callahan in 1938 what he planned to do with his life, he would have told you about open fields and endless sky. He grew up in rural Indiana, a small town called Greencastle, population 4,000, where the horizon stretched farther than ambition, and the only thing that moved faster than rumor was the wind. His father, Thomas Callahan, owned a small garage on the edge of town, fixing tractors and farm equipment, and on weekends he'd let Jimmy help. Not because the boy was good with engines, though he was, but because Jimmy asked questions. How does it work? Why does it move? What makes it fly? That last question consumed him. While other boys played baseball in the summer or skated on frozen ponds in winter, Callahan built model airplanes. Balsa wood frames held together with glue and hope, tissue paper stretched tight over fragile ribs. He'd carry them to the top of Miller's Hill, a gentle slope just outside town, and launch them into the wind. Sometimes they soared, riding invisible currents, banking gracefully before gliding back to earth. Other times they nosed over immediately and crashed spectacularly into the dirt. Each failure taught him something. Weight distribution. Wing angle. The way air moves over surfaces, creating lift, creating flight, creating magic. His father would watch from the truck, smoking a cigarette, smiling quietly. He'd served in the Great War, the first one, as a mechanic with the Army Air Service. He never talked much about it, but sometimes Jimmy would catch him staring at the sky with a look that was equal parts nostalgia and sadness. Like he'd left part of himself up there and never quite got it back. One autumn afternoon in 1938, After a particularly beautiful flight, the glider had stayed aloft for nearly 2 minutes, spiraling gracefully before landing softly in the grass. His father walked up the hill and stood beside him. "You're going to fly one day," he said, not looking at Jimmy, just watching the horizon. "A real one." Jimmy looked up, squinting against the low sun. "You think so?" His father nodded slowly. "I know so. You've got the touch, the instinct." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But when you do remember something." He turned then, meeting Jimmy's eyes. "Flying isn't about being fearless. It's about knowing when to trust your gut over the manual. The manual will keep you alive most of the time, but there are moments, split seconds, when the manual doesn't have the answer. And in those moments, you have to trust yourself." Jimmy didn't fully understand it then. He was 14. The world was small and safe and full of balsa wood dreams. War was something that happened in history books, not something that would reach across an ocean and pull him into the sky with 8 machine guns and a throttle that could push him past the edge of control. But 3 years later, everything changed. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Jimmy was 17, a senior in high school, sitting in the living room when the radio broadcast interrupted the Sunday afternoon music. The voice was urgent, barely controlled. Japanese aircraft had attacked the American naval base in Hawaii. Thousands dead, ships burning, war. His father sat in the chair across from him, face unreadable. They didn't speak. They just listened. And when the broadcast finally ended, Thomas Callahan stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. The same street where nothing ever happened. The same street that suddenly felt very far from safe. "It's here," he said quietly. "The war we all hoped wouldn't come. It's here." Jimmy graduated in May 1942. By June he'd enlisted. Army Air Forces. Pilot training. His father drove him to the recruitment office, shook his hand on the steps, and said only 3 words. "Make it count." The training was brutal.
Ground school.
Flight school. Navigation, gunnery, formation flying, instrument flying, aerobatics. 18 months of turning farm boys and factory workers into pilots. Some washed out. Some died in training accidents. But Jimmy thrived. He was good in the cockpit. Calm, precise. And when the instructors asked him why he wanted to fly, he always gave the same answer. Because the sky doesn't lie, it just is. And if you respect it, it'll carry you home. By the summer of 1943, he was in England, assigned to the 352nd Fighter Group, flying P-47 Thunderbolts out of a muddy airfield in East Anglia. The P-47 was a beast, 7 tons of metal engine and firepower. The pilots called it the Jug because it looked like a milk jug, wide, heavy, indestructible. It couldn't turn like a Spitfire or climb like a Mustang, but in a dive nothing could catch it, and its 850 caliber machine guns could shred anything in the sky. Jimmy flew his first combat mission in September 1943, bomber escort over France. 4 hours in the air, no contact with the enemy, just endless sky and the steady drone of the engine. But the missions got harder, the losses mounted. Empty chairs at breakfast, names crossed off the roster, and always the stories, the warnings. The legends. One name came up more than others. The Falcon, a Luftwaffe ace operating in their sector. Oberleutnant Ernst Schröder, 47 confirmed kills. The intelligence report said he was methodical, patient, deadly. He didn't dogfight. He hunted, positioned himself high and behind Allied formations, waited for someone to break formation or straggle, then dove vertically, a Falcon stoop, fired a single precise burst, and climbed back into the clouds before anyone could react. 47 pilots had died that way. 47 families had received telegrams, and the number kept growing. 3 days before November 12th, the squadron sat through a special briefing. The intelligence officer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous habit of clicking his pen, pinned a photograph to the corkboard at the front of the room. It was grainy, pulled from gun camera footage. A Focke-Wulf FW-190, sleek, dark, angular, and beneath it, typed on a small card, The Falcon. 47 confirmed kills. Extreme caution advised. The officer tapped the photo with his pen. Gentlemen, this pilot has been operating in our sector for 8 months. We've tried to intercept him 4 times. He's evaded us every time. He knows how we fly. He knows our tactics. He knows our weaknesses. He paused, letting that sink in. He's not reckless. He's not lucky. He's disciplined. And that makes him dangerous. Someone in the back, Callahan couldn't see who, muttered, "Sounds like a ghost." "He's not a ghost," the officer replied sharply. "He's just better than most of you. And if you don't respect that, you'll be number 48. Captain Richard Harding, the squadron leader, stood up. Harding was 32, ancient by fighter pilot standards. He'd been flying since before Pearl Harbor, had survived 2 crash landings and had a Purple Heart he never talked about. His face was hard, carved from exhaustion and responsibility. He looked at the room with eyes that had seen too many funerals. "Listen carefully," Harding said, voice low and firm. "If you encounter this pilot, you do not engage alone. You stay in formation. You cover each other. You call out his position and we deal with him as a unit. That's how we survive. That's how we win." He paused, scanning the faces. "One man trying to be a hero gets himself killed and weakens the entire squadron. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" filled the room. Harding's gaze swept across the pilots one more time, lingering on each face as if memorizing them. "Good. Because I'm not writing any more letters to mothers telling them their sons died because they broke formation." He turned to the map on the wall. "Tomorrow we're escorting B-17s over Belgium. Heavy flak expected. Luftwaffe presence likely. Stay sharp. Stay together. Dismissed." The pilots filed out quietly. Callahan stayed behind, staring at the photograph. 47 kills. He tried to imagine what that looked like. 47 planes spiraling down in flames, 47 parachutes that never opened, 47 voices screaming over the radio, and one man alone in a cockpit flying home each time, adding another mark to his tally. Lieutenant Robert Fisher, Callahan's wingman, walked up beside him. Bobby was 22, fresh-faced from a small town in Ohio. He had a picture of his girlfriend taped to his instrument panel and talked about the wedding they'd have when the war ended. He looked at the photo of the Falcon and swallowed hard. "You think we'll see him tomorrow?" Bobby asked. Callahan didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the dark shape in the photograph. Finally, he said, "I don't know. But if we do, stay close. Don't chase. Don't break. Just stay with me." Bobby nodded. Yeah, okay." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See you at breakfast." Callahan watched him leave. And for the first time since arriving in England, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Fear. Real, cold, gripping fear. Not for himself, but for Bobby, for all of them. Because protocol and formation tactics looked good on paper. But up there, at 10,000 feet with black crosses diving out of the sun, sometimes paper didn't matter. Now, at 10,000 feet on November 12th, that fear was real. The German fighters were closing fast. Callahan could see them clearly now. 6 Focke-Wulf 190s, staggered in a loose formation, diving toward the American P-47s from above. Standard Luftwaffe attack pattern. Energy advantage. Speed advantage. The Americans had altitude, but the Germans had momentum. And somewhere in that group of black crosses was the one that didn't follow standard patterns. The one that made his own rules and had survived 47 encounters by being smarter, faster, and more patient than everyone else. The American squadron tightened up. Callahan could see the other Thunderbolts on either side of him, their pilots gripping their sticks, eyes scanning the sky, radio silent except for breathing, and the occasional click of someone checking their mic. The formation looked solid from the outside. But Callahan could feel the tension. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Is he here? Is this the day? Then it happened. The lead German fighter, a 190 with yellow markings on the cowling, opened fire from 400 yards out. Too far for accuracy, but not too far for terror. Tracers arced through the air, bright lines of death stitching across the sky. Most missed, but some didn't. One of the American planes, a P-47 flying off to Callahan's left, took hits. Sparks erupted along the wing route. Smoke poured from the engine cowling. The plane shuddered, rolled inverted, and began to spiral downward. Callahan watched, waiting for the canopy to fly off, waiting for the parachute. It never came. Just a dark shape tumbling toward the earth, trailing black smoke like a funeral shroud. "Brake right. Brake right." Someone screamed over the radio, voice high and panicked. The formation scattered. Instinct overrode protocol. Survival overrode training. Planes peeled off in different directions, trying to evade, trying to get space, trying not to be the next one hit. Callahan banked hard right, pulling the stick, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat. His vision narrowed at the edges. Blood rushed to his legs. The horizon tilted, sky and earth swapping places for a moment before he leveled out. He keyed the radio. "Bobby, you with me?" Static. Then Bobby's voice, tight and breathless. Yeah, I'm here." "Where'd they go?" Callahan scanned the sky. The German fighters had blown through the formation and were climbing, using their speed to regain altitude. Standard tactic. Dive, attack, climb, reset. But something was wrong. Callahan counted. Only 5 German planes climbing. There had been 6. Where was the 6th? His heart kicked against his ribs. He looked up. Above. Behind. And there, high against the pale winter sun, he saw it. A single Focke-Wulf separate from the others, climbing vertically, positioning itself not for a dive on the scattered formation below, but for a precise, patient shot. The kind of shot that didn't waste ammunition, the kind of shot that killed the Falcon. Callahan's breath caught. He could see it unfolding in his mind like a film reel. The German pilot would reach the top of his climb, roll inverted, acquire his target, and dive. One burst, one kill. Number 48. And Callahan knew, he knew with a cold, certain clarity which plane the Falcon was lining up. Bobby Fischer. Bobby was still looking the wrong way, scanning the sky below, trying to find the other German fighters, completely unaware of the Predator positioning above him. Callahan's mind raced. Protocol said maintain formation. Protocol said, call it out and let the squadron leader coordinate a response. Protocol said do not engage alone. But there was no formation anymore. There was no time to coordinate. There was only Bobby flying straight and level and the Falcon climbing into position for the kill. The radio crackled. Captain Harding's voice sharp and commanding. All aircraft reform on me. Heading 270. Do not pursue. Repeat, do not pursue. Callahan's hand was already on the stick. His eyes locked on the distant shape of the Focke-Wulf climbing almost at the apex. In 5 seconds, maybe 10, the Falcon would roll over and dive, and Bobby would never see it coming, would never know what hit him, would never make it home to Ohio, would never marry his girl. Time slowed. Callahan could hear his father's voice, distant and clear. Flying isn't about being fearless. It's about knowing when to trust your gut over the manual. He could hear Harding's voice from the briefing. One man trying to be a hero gets himself killed. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, drowning out everything else, and then he heard nothing at all. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes before a choice you can't take back. Callahan pushed the stick forward. Hard. The P-47 Thunderbolt dropped into a dive. Not a controlled descent, a plunge. Nose down, throttle wide open. Gravity and 2,000 horsepower combining into a single screaming force. The world tilted. The horizon vanished. All that existed was speed, and the distant shape of the enemy fighter above, now starting its roll, now beginning its dive. The radio exploded. Callahan, what are you doing? Callahan, get back in formation. That's an order, Lieutenant. Break off. He didn't respond. Couldn't respond. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. His hands gripped the stick like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The dive was violent. The plane shook. Rivets groaned. The engine howled. Wind screamed past the canopy, a banshee wail that drowned out the radio, drowned out thought, drowned out everything except the need to fall faster, faster than the Falcon expected, faster than physics allowed, faster. The altimeter spun backward. 500 feet, 9,000, 8,500. The Falcon was in his dive now, nose pointed at Bobby Fischer, closing the distance with the patience of a surgeon. But he didn't see Callahan, didn't see the Thunderbolt hurtling up from below like a missile, trading altitude for speed, trading safety for one desperate chance. Callahan's vision began to narrow. Blood rushed to his head. G-forces pressed against his skull like a vice. He tasted copper. His breathing came in short, ragged gasps. The world became a tunnel. At the end of that tunnel was a dark shape with black crosses, and at the end of that dark shape was death. At 8,000 feet, their paths crossed. Callahan pulled up hard, every muscle in his body straining against the forces trying to tear him apart. The stick felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His arms screamed. His vision grayed at the edges. And then he was level for just a moment, directly beneath the diving Focke-Wulf. His thumb found the trigger. 8 .50 caliber machine guns roared to life. The sound was apocalyptic. A chainsaw made of thunder. Tracers tore through the air. Bright lines connecting his plane to the enemy in a web of fire and metal. Sparks erupted along the Focke-Wulf's left wing, metal shredded like paper. Smoke poured from the engine cowling. The German plane shuddered violently. The Falcon reacted instantly. Rolled hard left, breaking off the attack, abandoning Bobby Fischer, now fighting for his own life. But Callahan stayed with him. Stick left, rudder left, throttle forward. The Thunderbolt was heavier, slower in a turn, but in a dive it was a hammer, and Callahan swung it with everything he had. The Falcon pulled up sharply, trying to regain altitude, trying to use his lighter, more maneuverable aircraft to his advantage. Callahan followed, vision tunneling again as the G-forces mounted. The sky became a chaotic blur of motion. Clouds, sun, earth, metal all spinning, twisting, folding in on itself. His world shrank to the gun sight in front of him and the dark shape dancing just beyond it. The Falcon rolled inverted, pulled hard, trying to reverse direction, trying to get on Callahan's tail. But Callahan anticipated it. He'd watched gun camera footage. He'd studied the reports. The Falcon was good, but he had patterns. Everyone had patterns. Callahan rolled with him, pulling tighter, feeling the plane groan under the strain, feeling his body crushed into the seat, feeling the edges of consciousness start to fray. His vision flickered gray, black, gray again. He blinked hard, forced blood back into his brain, refused to pass out, refused to give up. The Falcon leveled out for a split second, repositioning. A mistake! A tiny human mistake. Callahan squeezed the trigger. The burst was short. Less than 2 seconds. But at 300 yards, 2 seconds was an eternity. Rounds punched through the Focke-Wulf's fuselage. The canopy shattered. The engine coughed, belched black smoke, and seized. The plane shuddered violently, lost airspeed, and began to fall. Callahan watched it spiral downward, trailing smoke like a dying comet. He waited for the canopy to jettison. Waited for the parachute. It never came. Just the plane tumbling end over end until it disappeared into the clouds 5,000 feet below. Silence. His hands were shaking. His breath came in ragged gasps. The cockpit felt too small, too hot, impossibly loud and impossibly quiet at the same time. Sweat stung his eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. And then, slowly, reality returned. The radio. Still crackling. Still alive, Callahan report, he exhaled. Long and shaky. Keyed the mic with a trembling thumb. Target down. Returning to formation, there was a pause. Static. Then Captain Harding's voice. Cold. Clipped, professional. Copy RTB, we'll talk when you land. Callahan climbed back to altitude. Legs feeling like jelly, arms like lead. The formation had scattered completely during the engagement, but the rest of the German fighters had broken off and headed east. The threat was over, for now. He rejoined what was left of the squadron, 4 planes instead of 7. No one spoke to him over the radio. No congratulations. No questions. Just silence. Professional, cold, judgmental silence except for one voice. Bobby Fischer. Quiet, shaken, Jimmy. Callahan closed his eyes for a moment. Yeah, Bobby. That was him, wasn't it? The Falcon? Yeah, a long pause. Then barely a whisper. Thanks. Callahan didn't respond. He just stared at the horizon and flew home. The landing was smooth. Too smooth. The kind of smooth that felt wrong, like the world should be shaking, should be chaotic, should reflect the violence of the last 20 minutes. But it wasn't. The runway was calm. The sky was clear. Ground crew waved him into his hard stand with the same bored efficiency they used every day, like nothing had happened. Like the sky hadn't just torn itself apart. Callahan taxied to his spot, cut the engine, and sat in the cockpit. The sudden silence was deafening. No engine roar. No wind scream. No gunfire. Just his own breathing and the slow tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. His hands rested on his thighs, still shaking. He pressed them flat, willing them to be still. It didn't work. The canopy slid back. Cold air rushed in. One of the ground crew, a sergeant named Morrison, climbed onto the wing and looked at Callahan with wide eyes. Lieutenant, you okay? Callahan nodded. Couldn't speak yet. His throat was too dry. Morrison grinned. Hell of a dive, sir. Heard it on the radio. Whole base is talking about it. Callahan climbed out slowly, legs unsteady, and dropped to the tarmac. He stood there for a moment looking at the Thunderbolt. The wings were scorched from gunblast. The fuselage was pockmarked with shrapnel from near misses, but it was intact. Still flying, still here. Morrison walked around the plane, counting damage. You got some new holes, but nothing critical. She'll fly again tomorrow. He looked at Callahan. You really get him? The Falcon? Callahan met his eyes. I got somebody. He walked toward the debriefing hut. Other pilots were already there, standing in small groups, smoking, talking in low voices. When Callahan entered, the conversation stopped. Eyes turned toward him. Some curious, some impressed, some cold and hard. Captain Harding stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, face carved from stone. My office. Now. Callahan followed him into a small side room, barely bigger than a closet. A desk, 2 chairs, a map on the wall, a single overhead bulb. Harding closed the door and turned to face him. For a long moment he just stared. Then he spoke, voice low and controlled. What the hell were you thinking? Callahan met his gaze. I was thinking Bobby Fischer was about to die. And you decided to disobey a direct order to save him? Yes, sir. Do you have any idea what you risked? Not just your own life, Callahan. The integrity of the entire formation. If that dive had failed, if he'd gotten behind you instead, you'd be dead right now. And we'd be down 2 pilots instead of 1 German. Did you think about that? Yes, sir. And you did it anyway. Yes, sir. Harding's jaw tightened. He turned away, hands on the desk, head down. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, tired. You killed him. The Falcon. Oberleutnant Ernst Schröder. 47 confirmed kills. And you got him. Callahan said nothing. Harding turned back. How did you know you could take him? I didn't, sir. Then why? Callahan hesitated. He thought about Miller's Hill, about balsa wood gliders, about his father's voice. Because if I didn't try, Bobby was dead for sure. This way, at least one of us had a chance. Harding stared at him for a long time. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy, and sat down. You're going to write a full report. Every detail. Altitude, airspeed, deflection angles, everything. Command's going to want to know exactly how a lieutenant with 18 months of experience took down one of the Luftwaffe's best aces. Am I being court-martialed, sir? Harding shook his head. No, but you're not getting a medal either. Not yet, maybe not ever. He leaned back in his chair. What you did saved Fisher's life. It also broke protocol, and command doesn't like that even when it works. Especially when it works, because then other pilots start thinking they can do it too, and most of them can't. Callahan nodded slowly. Understood, sir. Harding stood, walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Off the record, Callahan. Sir? You made the right call. He opened the door. But don't ever do it again. He left. Callahan sat alone in the small room for a long time. Then he pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. The days that followed were strange. Callahan flew more missions, followed orders, stayed in formation. But something had changed. The other pilots looked at him differently now. Some with a kind of guarded respect, others with suspicion, like he was a grenade with the pin pulled. Useful but dangerous. A few avoided him entirely. Bobby Fischer bought him a drink one night at the officers' club, didn't say much. Just set the glass down in front of Callahan, raised his own, and nodded once. That was enough. More than enough. The after-action report went up the chain of command. Callahan didn't hear anything for over a week. Then on a cold morning in late November, he was summoned to the operations tent. Inside, a colonel he'd never met was waiting. Silver eagles on his collar. Ribbons on his chest. Face that had seen too many wars. The colonel didn't smile. Didn't shake hands. He just handed Callahan a folder. Read it. Inside was a translated German field report stamped with Wehrmacht insignia. It described the loss of a Focke-Wulf 190, piloted by Oberleutnant Ernst Schroeder on November 12, 1944, over Belgium. 47 confirmed victories, killed in action by an American P-47 Thunderbolt. Cause of death: vertical diving attack from below. Pilot caught by surprise. Aircraft destroyed. No survivors. The colonel watched Callahan read. You ended an 8-month killing streak, Lieutenant. The pilot had taken down some of our best. Squadron leaders. Experienced pilots. Men with twice your flight hours. And you got him with a maneuver he never saw coming. Callahan looked up from the report. Yes, sir. How did you know to dive? Callahan thought about it. I didn't know, sir. I knew I had to. The colonel nodded slowly. Instinct. He took the folder back. We're studying your after-action report. Tactical Command wants to understand the geometry of that dive. If it's replicable, if we can teach it, we'll incorporate it into advanced fighter tactics training. And if it's not replicable, sir? The colonel's expression didn't change. Then we'll call it what it is. A lucky gamble that happened to work. He paused. But between you and me, Lieutenant, I don't think it was luck. I think you read the situation faster than your training allowed, and made a decision most pilots wouldn't have the guts to make. That's not luck. That's judgment under fire. And that's rare. He left. Callahan stood alone in the tent, holding nothing, feeling everything. 47 kills. 47 names that would never go home. And now it was done. Somewhere in Germany, a family was receiving a telegram. A mother was weeping. A father was folding a flag, and history would record the name Ernst Schroeder, Luftwaffe ace, killed in action over Belgium. But history wouldn't record the choice. The split-second decision at 10,000 feet, when protocol and instinct collided and one man chose to fall. By December, the war had moved east. The squadron followed, chasing the Wehrmacht back toward Germany. More missions, more flights. More empty chairs at breakfast that no one talked about. Callahan kept flying. He followed orders. He stayed in formation. But late at night, when the barracks were quiet and the other pilots slept, he would sit by the frosted window and write letters home. One letter, addressed to his father, he wrote 3 times. Each time he tore it up. Finally, on the 4th try, he wrote something he could live with. But he never sent it. Just folded it and kept it in his jacket pocket next to his wings. Dad, you were right about flying. It isn't about being fearless. It's about knowing when to trust your gut over the manual. I didn't understand that when you told me on Miller's Hill. I thought it was just something you said. Wisdom that sounded good but didn't mean much. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I broke formation. Disobeyed a direct order, to after a German pilot who'd killed 47 of our guys. I didn't think about the rules. I didn't calculate the odds. I just thought about Bobby and how he'd never see his girl again if I didn't do something. I got the German. Sent him down in flames, saved Bobby. And now command doesn't know whether to court-martial me or put me in a training film. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best decisions are the ones no one can decide if they were right or wrong. Maybe the only thing that matters is what happens after. Bobby's still here, still flying, still writing letters to his girl back home, still planning that wedding. And I'm still here too, still flying, still trying to figure out if what I did was brave or stupid or just necessary. I think you'd say it was necessary, and maybe that's all it needs to be. The sky is different now, Dad. Colder, harder. But it's still honest. It still doesn't lie, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Miss you. Miss Miller's Hill. Miss the gliders and the quiet. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. Jimmy, he never sent that letter. But he carried it through the rest of the war. Through the Battle of the Bulge. Through the final push into Germany. Through VE Day and the quiet chaos of victory. And when he finally came home in the summer of 1945, he brought it with him. James Callahan returned to Greencastle, Indiana. In June, he traded his uniform for work clothes and went back to his father's garage. He married a girl named Catherine from the next town over. Had 3 kids. Built model airplanes with them on Saturday mornings, teaching them about lift and drag and the way air moves over wings. And when they asked him what the war was like, he just said, loud, fast, and full of choices you don't get to make twice. The story of the unauthorized dive never made the newspapers. No headlines, no medals, no parades, just a single line in a classified after-action report that eventually found its way into a filing cabinet at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Most people never knew it happened. Most people never knew Ernst Schroeder's killing streak ended not because of a coordinated squadron effort or a lucky shot, but because one pilot fell faster than anyone thought possible. But the men who were there knew. Bobby Fischer flew 23 more missions after November 12th. He survived the war, went home to Ohio and married his girl in the spring of 1946. He never forgot. Years later, in 1987, after Bobby passed away from a heart attack, his son found something tucked inside an old flight manual on a shelf in the garage. A handwritten note dated December 1944. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. November 12th, 1944. I was a dead man. I didn't see him coming. Didn't hear the warning. Didn't know the Falcon was above me, lining up the shot that would make me number 48. And then the sky opened up, and someone fell. Jimmy Callahan broke every rule to save my life, disobeyed orders, risked everything, dove into a fight he had no business winning. Command argued about it for weeks. Some called it heroic, some called it reckless, I don't care what they called it. What Jimmy did that day wasn't unauthorized. It was right, and maybe that's the only rule that matters. When everything else fails, when the manual doesn't have the answer and the orders don't make sense, you trust the person next to you to do what's right. Jimmy did that. And I'm alive because of it. I got married, had kids, built a life, all because someone fell when no one said he could. I owe him everything. Bobby. That note was later donated to the Air Force Historical Research Agency. It sits now in a file labeled 352nd Fighter Group Notable Engagements 1944. Researchers have studied it, analyzed the dive angles, calculated the closing speeds, tried to understand how a pilot with limited combat experience managed to outfly one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced aces. One analyst wrote in her notes, "The success of the engagement appears to have relied less on technical superiority and more on decisive action taken faster than the enemy anticipated." Callahan didn't outturn Schroeder. He outfell him. Another researcher added, "Sometimes the only way to win is to fall faster than the enemy expects." And sometimes the only way to save someone is to break the rules everyone else is too afraid to break. There are no statues of James Callahan, no memorials, no documentaries. He never wrote a memoir, never gave interviews. When he died quietly in 1998 at the age of 74, the obituary in the Greencastle newspaper didn't mention the war. Just that he'd been a mechanic, a father, a husband, a man who loved airplanes and open sky. But somewhere in the National Archives, in a folder marked Classified, Declassified 1975, is a report. And in that report is a single sentence that captures everything. On November 12, 1944, Lieutenant James Callahan executed an unauthorized vertical dive to intercept an enemy fighter threatening a fellow pilot. In doing so, he eliminated a high-value target responsible for 47 Allied casualties. Though the action violated standing orders, it is assessed to have been tactically sound and morally justified. No disciplinary action recommended. Commendation for valor under consideration. The commendation never came, but the life saved did, and that life went on to save others. Bobby Fischer became a flight instructor after the war, taught hundreds of young pilots how to fly, how to survive, how to trust the man next to them. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the kill, not the ace, not the dive that made it into the training manuals years later, but the choice. The moment when the rules said one thing and the heart said another, and a young man from Indiana chose to fall. Because sometimes history doesn't remember you for what you were ordered to do. Sometimes it remembers you for what you chose to do, when no one else would.